In 1993, we got Alive, the harrowing true story dramatization of the Uruguayan rugby team that crashed in the Andes. Now, 30 years later, director J.A. Bayona brings us Society of the Snow. It's the same story, but with a different presentation. So let's dive in. In 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 was chartered to fly a rugby team to Chile and catastrophically crashed on a glacier in the heart of the Andes. Only 29 of the 45 passengers survived, finding themselves in one of the world's toughest environments. So while the story is the same as Alive, Society of the Snow chooses a more subdued style to present the narrative. Instead of having large dramatic tension and outbursts between characters, we get introspective monologues where characters confront their own mortality and struggle then with their thoughts of hopelessness. I mean, there's still some dramatic tension between the characters, but it's not blown out of proportion or sensationalized to amp up the emotions artificially. And just because we get a more quiet storytelling experience, that doesn't mean that it's not wrought with anxiety, horror, sadness, and fear. The characters display the gamut of emotions very convincingly, and their circumstances are just made all the more real due to the set. Now, I'm not sure how much of this was actually filmed in the snow, but through this, it feels as if they're stranded amongst the snow-drenched peaks. I was highly impressed with the filmmaking choices because the camera worked to put us right next to the characters as they're experiencing tragedy after terrible tragedy. Now, some of the settings are claustrophobic or even suffocating, and those feelings, they're palpable thanks to camera placement and movements. Now, there's a point where the plane fuselage is inundated with snow. It's like we're put into the wreckage with the survivors. I mean, terrifyingly just working to get air and then survive. And also, as to be expected, many scenes showcase the Andes Mountains, and these are breathtaking, but also wildly daunting. Now, at many points within the story, we watch the characters attempt to climb to the peaks to just try and reach safety. When we're shown the expanse, I mean, it's captured beautifully. The cinematography is stunning in the way that it showcases not only the grandeur, but also the treachery of the range. And I especially love how the camera, it doesn't just quickly show us a wide shot and then bounces back to the characters. Instead, we get to linger on the scenery, sometimes then having the camera pull out slowly so that we can see the tininess of the characters in relation to their surroundings. Now, there were also many moments when the camera would patiently sit on a character as they wrote a note or maybe drifted off in their thoughts. It was intimate, but without being invasive, and it created this sense of serene beauty that was mixed with utter loneliness. Because the pacing of the story, it's slower, we're allowed to experience that despair right along with the characters. I mean, as survivors begin to die from complications or exposure, there's also not typically a massive deal made about their passing. But there are some quiet memorials for many that just help to illustrate both the waning of hope that's bearing over all of them and also the solemn respect that they displayed for each of their fallen friends. Now, while we don't also get a great deal of background on every passenger on the plane, some of them do have their stories told in the form of narrations or memories. Now, many of these, they're told over montages of actions, whether that be as somebody remembering a rugby match, or maybe they're just recounting how it is they even ended up on the plane. And so many of these types of narrations, they're heartbreaking, but also very captivating thanks to the tone and the word choice. I mean, it's almost like poetry, but without feeling pretentious or artsy. I know one of the central shocking moments in this true story is the fact that in order to survive, the survivors had to begin to eat some of the deceased. Now, for this movie, it's not exploited or hyped for shock or gore. I mean, every part of this aspect is handled in quiet and respective ways. Even the discussion the survivors have about whether or not it's even an option, it was nothing drawn out or explosively emotive. A rational discussion was had, and then the story allows for both those who choose to partake and those who didn't, without casting any sort of negativity for either decision. Now, for as much as I liked the different approach to telling this story, it's 2 hours and 24 minutes long, and I felt the time. The story effectively creates emotional depth and wonderful character investment, but because it's so patiently told, it feels slow. Now, I don't think this takes away from the impact of the story, but it can make the watching experience a bit arduous. I think this also can just feel a little long if you're familiar with the story, or maybe you've seen Alive or any other dramatic presentation surrounding the tragedy. So overall, Society of the Snow presents a familiar story in a new and harrowing way. The patience in which the story is told captivates and creates palpable stress, but also makes the narrative overly long. Spectacular cinematography and stunning character moments build a haunting tale where, even though the outcome is known, we still root for everyone to survive. The content is weighty, and it doesn't create a desire for a second viewing, but this is masterfully presented and it deserves a watch. There's no sex, some nudity, a bunch of profanity, and a lot of terrible violence. I give Society of the Snow 4.5 out of 5 couches. So, are there any tragic true stories that you've seen adapted into a film that you'd recommend? I mean, for me, Everest, it's a heartbreaking watch. But I'd love to hear some of your recommendations and choices in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.